Well, hi, welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm Mark Graven. Our guest today is Steve Gamlin. He describes himself as, and I'm sure this is accurate, so he is a speaker, an author, a vision boarder, and I'll have to ask and get clarification on what this means, a humor punch-up specialist. So before I introduce Steve a little bit more, Steve, thanks for being here today. How's it going?
Going great, Mark. Thank you so much for having me. Great to be here and look forward to sharing some cool energy with your listeners.
Yeah, well, thanks. So what does Steve Gamlin do? He teaches individuals and organizations how to see their goals, to understand why they want them, and to build an action plan for achievement. And how does Steve do this? It's a blend of back to basics positivity, engagement, humor, and visualization. So a lot of our audience will be just listening. So I guess they'll have to imagine the visualization, and they have to imagine me saying that word correctly the first time, which I did not really do. So Steve, thank you for being here. I'm sure the humor is going to come through regardless of whether people are watching or listening.
Always. And that's such an important part of everyday life. Like you said, the back to basic stuff, and you can weave a little humor in there. You're going to be okay. And that's how you and I get memorable. And that's a great way to drive the lessons home.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And you can learn more about Steve's work at stevegamlin.com. He's the author of 4 books, including, here's a fun title for you, Table 7, Your Centerpiece Is on Fire. So before we get into the core question and talking about mistakes, like in a nutshell, what's the story behind that book title?
That's actually my other 3 books are all personal development. That one goes to my DJ business, which I've owned for about almost 28 years. About a decade in, I had this arsenal of stories of the weirdest things that had happened to me. And I used to tell the stories to nervous brides over the phone, and they'd be all worried. I'd say, well, kick back. Let me tell you what I've survived so far. And all of a sudden, like these moments we get, 3 brides in 1 week said, oh my gosh, you should write those down and make a book. And within a year, it was done. And yeah, Table 7, Your Centerpiece Is on Fire, which is actually a true story. That did happen very early in my career. But it was once described by a reviewer as required reading for nervous brides. So it's still kicking around out there somewhere, but it was a joy to write and usually a joy to live the stories as long as they all ended happily.
Well, it sounds like it would be fun to read. And you mentioned the DJ business, the wedding DJ business. Part of your professional background was time on the radio as a DJ, right?
Yes, it was. Yeah. From 1992 to 2002, I worked 15 years worth of hours in 10 in the radio industry and fried myself out.
Wow. So it's probably a different episode and different mistakes and experiences there. Or maybe that is going to be your favorite mistake. I don't know. But did you have a particular radio voice? Is that something like you flip that on, or you sound the way you sound now?
Actually, it's funny because people now say, oh, I really enjoy your voice. You have a good radio voice. And I always say the same thing. It's a dang shame I didn't have it at the time. I was a rock radio morning show producer for most of those years. So I was in the studio, but I was not necessarily on air, mostly because I just didn't have the confidence to get behind a mic. And out of sheer necessity near the end of my career, our morning guy quit and the owner of the station was going to put it back on satellite. And I said, guys, I've been in the radio industry for 8 years. I can do this. Mm-hmm. And they didn't know I'd never been on the air. And I was terrible, but they allowed it. And I kind of got a little more confident and grew into it. And then that led to everything I'm doing
all right
now. But yeah, this is not the voice I had back then. No, not even close.
It's just a matter of age and accumulated experience. The voice is better now.
Yeah. And I think just being comfortable in your own skin. And the turning point for me came right at the very end of my career. I was trying to sound like a DJ. And then one day I was so flustered, I said, hey, look, this is Steve, Big 101.5, New Hampshire's Classic Rock. Look, I may stink as a DJ, but if you tolerate me reading the weather for the next 42 seconds, I promise to play you a great song. And my boss came downstairs and he goes, why can't you just do that every time? He goes, that was the best thing you've ever said. And that's really where it started. The authenticity just fell out.
There you go. There you go. So there's kind of a precursor mistake that you might have made when you were first. It sounds like one mistake was not being confident and then learning how to get past that, and then trying to be quote unquote radio voice instead of being yourself.
Exactly. I mean, if we just all understood that we all have gifts, we all have a style, we all have this certain thing that makes us attractive, and I mean that in an energy way. I think more of us would stop trying to fit into the mold of what we think something is supposed to be like. And for those who are just listening right now, I'm throwing the air quotes madly here. What we think we're supposed to look and sound like. And the authenticity is really the seed where everything I'm doing now started. Just in that moment of not knowing what to say, I was just myself.
Yeah. Well, that's great. So we get a couple of bonus mistakes there, if you will. Precursor to, we'll find out what the story is as we ask guests here. Sometimes I get to it right away, and sometimes I ramble around into it. I'm going to hit you with the main question here, Steve. Looking back at your career and the different things you've done, what's your favorite mistake?
My favorite mistake, actually, the radio career was the opening act to my favorite mistake. After working 15 years worth of hours in 10 and DJing weddings pretty much every weekend and being absolutely fried mentally, physically, emotionally, just everything. My first marriage was crumbling right around the same time. And I made this very rash, very abrupt decision to walk away from my radio career without a full-time job. So I took, at the time, about a $36,000 a year pay cut all at once, went through a divorce, discovered as I was going through and putting our paperwork together that I was $62,000 in debt at age 35 without a full-time job. So in a very short window of time, I blew my entire life off the face of the planet as I knew it. And I just right into the ashes. And that's what frustration will do to you. Is just cause you to slam on the brakes. I mean, I tell people, I said, look, man, I pulled an Acme rocket roller skate Wile E. Coyote ride, dating myself there with that reference, right off the cliff and blew my life into a million pieces. But of course, within a couple of years, looking back, still saw it as a mistake. I still see it now, even nearly 20 years removed, as a mistake, but it also planted the seeds for the greatest comeback in the most amazing life I could have even imagined. But in a lot of ways, I still look at the scars of it and say, yeah, that was a big mistake.
Well, so there are different types of favorite mistakes on this show. You know, there are the mistakes that turn out not to be a mistake. There are the mistakes that in some way lead to more positive things to come. Before we talk about the things that you've been doing since, I'd be curious to go back and, explore a little bit, like what was that moment of quitting? It sounds like it was building up. I'm curious what led to that buildup. What was that frustration that you mentioned?
Biggest frustration was there were 3 radio stations within the same building, and I'm not a confrontational person. I disagreed. One of the other guys who'd been there for a long time was a local legend. He and I butted heads over so many things, and we're both very territorial about our stations. And I continuously caught this person kind of behind the scenes bad-mouthing us and just this negativity. And I don't do well with negativity, and it festers and it gets really, really bad. And I was stressed out to the max, exhausted, not eating well, not sleeping well. My cholesterol, I went to a health fair one time, and I got the high score of the day on the cholesterol machine.
Oh, no.
It was almost a perfect bowling score.
Oh,
And
wow.
they said, look, you're in your mid-30s. You're going to be dead by 40 if you keep this up. And lack of communication at home. And the radio station was also an hour and 10 minutes from home. So 2 nights a week, I would sleep up there on my boss's couch. So my marriage was suffering. We were struggling to communicate, and feelings were getting hurt on all sides. And I finally just said, look, I'm just going to pull the pin on this grenade and blow it all up. And it took a lot more with it than I originally planned.
Yeah.
But the way I put it this way, the way I went about it, I still see the approach as a mistake.
I guess not figuring out how to grin and bear it long enough to have that next thing lined up.
Oh, you mean like a plan? Yeah.
A job, a plan.
Yeah, what I now refer to as, oh yeah, a plan it would have been very helpful, but I am very, very, and I can't say enough verys, and I'm saying this in a bold font like a Gaudy stout, blessed with the family and friends that I have who were the safety net when I could have disintegrated even farther and had a
Mhm.
very not happy ending.
Yeah,
Very, very blessed to
yeah,
that I landed in a safe, warm place with really good food and a full fridge.
yeah. So I guess last question before talking more about what happened as you got things onto a really good track. Was there a particular moment where it hit you like, okay, no, that's it, I got to get out of here? Was there a particular thing, or it's just that building hit a point where just in general you said, okay, that's all I can do?
I think that it's kind of like a steam pressure gauge. I think the needle finally just hit whatever got dumped on top of the pile this one week. Somebody said something wrong, or I heard something about this other person I was butting heads with, or I couldn't sleep. I was exhausted, but I couldn't sleep. And I was driving 36,000 miles a year at that point too. And I used to fall asleep driving in the middle of the
Oh, yeah.
afternoon or night. And I've gotten one wheel off the highway at 65 miles an hour. And I think all of a sudden I just said, I'm done, and just slammed on the brakes of everything.
Because you were on air at 6, I'm guessing, with most morning shows, or
Yeah, usually by 6. And I lived, like I said, a little over an hour from the radio station. So the nights I slept at home, I was up at 3, quarter past 3 in the morning, quick shower, start driving. And yeah, and then do the radio show, and then do my regular job of production director and copywriter for the rest of the day,
right?
and then drive home or stay up there and crash on my boss's couch. And the nights I stayed up there, I would work until 8 or 9 at night.
Yeah,
So just
yeah,
sheer exhaustion. I mean, 5-hour energy hadn't been invented yet, but if you owned stock in Mountain Dew back then, you're welcome for the
yeah.
dividends.
Right. And I mean, that's one thing, it seems like people who do morning television or morning radio do quite often burn out on it. So I grew up around Detroit, and right after college, the top show in Detroit you may have heard of was the Drew and Mike Show.
Mm-hmm.
And Drew Lane, who I would love to have as a guest on this podcast someday, he's now doing a podcast. They got fired from WRIF maybe 7 or 8 years ago and replaced. But there had been a couple of points where, because they were doing the morning show, his wife had been sick, and there were times where he just had to take a long hiatus of like a year or 18 months. And then when he finally he did come back to radio, he came back in the afternoon, because I'm sure that was just more compatible with life. So when you think of, hey, funny guy, entertain me at 6:02 in the morning with the traffic and the weather, like, people don't often think of like, okay, well, gosh, that person was up at 3:30 or what have you.
Right. Right. Oh yeah. People think we just, flip a switch and we're on. Oh, for every minute you hear, there's an hour of our lives that goes into it. And yeah, it's a grind. It really is.
Yeah. So the things that you're doing now, and there'll be some pieces to fill in along the way, but a couple of questions. So the book title, that one book title especially drew me in. The name of your company piqued my interest, so I'm going to ask you this name, Motivational Firewood. What's the meaning behind that? What's the origin of that name?
When I first started as a speaker, I went to a meeting of the National Speakers Association here in New England, and they meet just south of Boston. So I drove all the way down there, and somebody says, well, you got to be in the NSA, National Speaker. So I drove down, and it was my first meeting, so I knew nothing and nobody knew me. So I had one of those blue name badges that basically say, hey, look at me, I am clueless. I'm new. And this gentleman came over and he says, oh, hi, Steve. Yeah, my name is Don. What brings you here today? I said, well, I want to be a motivational speaker. And he started asking me questions. What do you speak on? What sets you apart? And I said, I want to help people. And he said, you're not helping yourself right now. Let's talk about what makes you different and unique. And he was so patient, and he was so kind and generous with his time. We had about maybe a 5-minute conversation, and he kept asking questions. And finally I said, look, Don, if people come to hear me speak, then they obviously have a spark of something they want to do in their lives or make better or a goal. So if I share a story or an example or a lesson or something that inspires them to go for it, it's like I've provided them with motivational firewood for their spark. And he says, okay, one more question.
Mhm.
Do you know anything about trademarks? I said, well, I'm more clueless about trademarks than I was about motivational speaking 5 minutes ago. He said, look it up, because I love the premise. I love the way you just described it. And he says, what I love most was the look of joy on your face when you just gave me that answer. He goes, you're onto something. Stay with it. Stay with it. And I did. I've owned motivational firewood trademark ever since.
Yeah. And so is there motivational kindling that goes along with that spark as well?
The
I'm
little
not asking-
tiny pieces are maybe kindling. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's,
Yeah.
it's daily messages on social media, positivity. It's appearances on great shows like yours, and just being able to share back to basics positivity with humor anywhere I can.
Yeah. So you do the speaking, and then the idea of vision boards. That's something I've heard more about in the last year. I've got a friend and a colleague who does work that may be similar, or at least it uses that same phrase. What is a vision board? How is that used in different ways?
The way I describe it is a vision board is a wall-mounted GPS for the rest of your life. It's understanding where you are right now, and then figuring out in 9 major areas of your life. It includes your career, your finances, your relationships, your connection, your physical health, your emotional well-being, your spirituality, your ethics, morals, and integrity, and all these things working together at all times to describe where you want your life to be. Say, I always start a year from now. Don't give me that I'm going to be a billionaire in 20 years, but I have no clue how to start, because you're not going to get going for long. So what I encourage people to do is wonder, what do my goals look like, which I follow up with feel like, sound like, even smell like, to try to get a sensory connection to where they want to be. And the most important thing you can understand is why you want that. As deeply rooted a reason as possible, because if you just say, well, it would be a good idea, a pebble could knock you off the road. A year like 2020 could just demolish you.
Sure.
But if you understand your why and you have that good solid vision and know where you are now, you stand a much better chance of not only recognizing the little steps you need to take continuously, but also the joy of what it's going to be like, because you've already felt it when you get there. So I walk people through a 10-step process, and I take as much of the woo-woo out of it as possible, because it drives me crazy.
What
People look
do
at
you
our
mean by
industry.
that? Or what's an example of woo-woo that may be surrounding vision board idea?
In The Secret, which was my introduction to law of attraction, they had a great basic broad brush message. And then they put in a genie in a magic lamp and said, if you wish for it, the law of attraction will bring it to you. And I get that all the time. I get pushback from so many people, especially people in the corporate world. And I do work with some corporate teams. They'll say, yeah, don't bring none of that wishful woo-woo unicorns and rainbows. And I say, you're all set, because I can't stand that stuff either.
Yeah.
So I try to take all of that mystic, magical phraseology out of it and just make it a good blue-collar, meat and potatoes, take action from the gut, let's push forward together approach. And it's working very well.
Yeah, well, good. I mean, yeah, and sometimes in my professional circles, people throw around an expression. It's attributed to I don't know who. If you can dream it, you can do it.
Yep.
And I think, well, there's something to be said for having dreams, but people have dreams that they can fly. So I think we have to be a little careful. Like, I'm not trying to be Mr. Negative, but you know, like a dream is maybe a good first step. But what I hear you saying, Steve, is correct me if I'm wrong, I'm guessing a little bit, that a vision board and thinking about the first steps helps provide not just the end state vision, but some practical, helps you break it down and figure out, well, how am I going to get there?
Exactly. And the way I explain it is, think of it like an old wooden roller coaster. And we have one here in southern New Hampshire. It's actually sitting on it is where I got this lesson. You get in at the bottom of the ride, at the very beginning, and you surround yourself with people who also want to be on that same journey. And then it starts to go click, 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 click. Now, your goal is to get over the top of that first hill. So you have to take all these little steps to get there. You can't cheat. You can't start halfway up. You can't skip a bunch of them. So many people out there say, oh, we have a life hack. to get you to avoid all this hard work. No, no, no. We have got to take every single step, because when we do that last one that gets us to achieve it, that roller coaster goes over the top, and the momentum, you couldn't stop that ride if you tried.
Right.
And so that's the way I try to explain it with people, is don't just set it and forget it. We're not a roasted chicken on a, Saturday morning infomercial.
Right.
Set it and forget it. That we have to be part of the process every day, and don't stare at the ground, stare ahead and use your senses and see opportunities and make connections and learn new skills in collaborations and everything it takes to get there. You've got to be a part of the process.
Yeah. Well, to think of that roller coaster analogy, the engineer in me says, well, it requires quite literally energy to get that car up that initial hill.
Oh, most definitely.
And, there are so many cases where something gets described as an overnight success, maybe to build on your analogy, because they see, well, that roller coaster's already got its momentum and it's going downhill. You didn't see the years and years of energy and effort to get up the hill.
Exactly. So many people see those smiling faces with the tears and faces of terror at the end of the ride and go, oh, that must be great. And they don't see all that work it took just to be able to enjoy the ride.
Yeah, right.
And that's life.
Yeah, and thinking of the roller coaster, maybe there's anticipation. That's fun, but that click, 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 that is the most boring part of the ride, I guess.
It can be. And it does build anticipation. And sometimes people get scared the closer they get to the top, because all of a sudden they're going to be at the part that they can't control. They said they wanted to be there. And then I've heard people in the cars behind me, because I was in the front car and it went over, and I heard somebody go, oh my God, here it comes. And then I heard them screaming for the next 3 minutes. Yeah. But sometimes we don't know what's on the other side of the hill. We want bigger, or we want better, or more, or faster, or whatever it is. And so we set ourselves to that motion. It doesn't mean that we're not suddenly going to be afraid when we get to the top, and your eyes get real big when you're staring for that moment that nothing's happened yet, but yet you can't go back.
Yeah.
And I call it excitement. I call it blowing out the cobwebs, which I do something at least once a year to scare me. So I've gone skydiving. I've jumped in the ocean in the middle of February for a fundraiser in 3-degree weather. Yeah. And every once in a while, I just go do this thing that's going to rattle me around a little bit, inspire me, scare me, and just blow out the cobwebs. And just it gets me excited for life again.
Kind of resets things in a more meaningful way than the afternoon 5-hour energy.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, believe me, 3-degree weather jumping into the ocean in February makes you more awake than 5-hour energy does. Yes.
Yeah. So of all the different things that you do, Steve, the speaking and the vision board works, and we'll come back and talk more about vision board in a minute. The one thing, and writing, the thing that I don't know anything about, and so I have to ask, is what does it mean to be a humor punch-up specialist? Like, who are you working with as your client, and what are the types of ways you help people who are trying to be funny or funnier, I guess?
Yeah, it's mostly other speakers that I work with for that. Occasionally it's for speaking clients of mine who have a CEO or somebody who has to get up and speak often. Most often it's other speakers. And so many people don't understand the mechanics of humor or comedy. I've actually literally watched a CEO get up before, who was supposed to be bringing me up as a speaker, and get up and tell an off-color joke or say something very offensive and think they were being funny. They tell a street joke or something not really appropriate for their audience. So one of the big things that I work on with other speakers is, first off, who is your audience? What is the level of humor you can get away with? And let me help you craft your stories in such a way that your face, your voice, and your body language all help to increase the impact and memorability of your message. So it's using humor in a very appropriate, safe, and impactful way, and not just be up there telling jokes. So I've got a number of fellow speaker clients who are part of that. And ever since I added that to my online profile, that is a question I get a lot, and I always love answering it.
Yeah. And so do you, let's say, I can think of, like, there are times there's this phrase I've heard, script doctor, where somebody will read a script and maybe they might even use the phrase, let's punch it up. Do you watch, I imagine you watch tape video, I'm dating myself, you watch digital recordings of somebody speaking or telling jokes and sort of like reviewing game film, give feedback or say, well, here's a way you might set up that punchline better. Here's a way you might maybe need to get to the punchline sooner.
Exactly. If video's available, I'll ask for that. And if they have just audio, that'll do as well, although it's a little more difficult. Sometimes some people will just say, look, I haven't delivered this yet, but I need to make it funnier. That can be a challenge, but I'll still go through and I'll be walking around while I'm reading it. Going, okay, what's the physicality of this? So we can not only the visual, but the audio and then the physical movement. Trying to just say, okay, as a bare bones basic, let's start here. Here are my suggestions for that. So I've done from video, from just audio, and getting a script saying, this is brand new, I'm delivering it in a week, can you make it funny?
Wow. And that's
no
sometimes
pressure
a tall
or
order,
anything.
maybe, right? They're asking, can you? I mean, is the answer ever no?
The answer is I can do something.
Sure.
I can't make it perfect.
Yeah.
But if you are happy with what I create, use it, pay me for it, and we'll move on afterward if you want to continue to grow it. But thus far, knock on wood, 0 refunds and numerous repeat clients. So I'm very happy with that part of my business.
Yeah. So when we talk about the mistakes that people could make using humor, like, the off-color joke seems like, my gosh, that like some of these things seem like obvious mistakes, but yet people get themselves in trouble. Are there some less obvious mistakes that people make of maybe not being offensive, but somehow just being ineffective or awkward?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things with that is when people just race through things and they don't let the audience be part of the living, breathing moment of something. Something could be funny, but the audience may start to laugh and the speaker or the presenter just immediately starts talking and going into their next thing and not acknowledging that shift of energy and giving their audience the chance to be a part of a moment. And you wind up stepping on them. And then if the next thing you say is supposed to be funny, they miss the beginning of it because they were still laughing at the first one. So when this one ends, it's silence and it's awkward. And to an inexperienced speaker, that spells failure. And silence is way louder than applause. And you have to be a speaker to understand that. Silence is deafening.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the old Southwest Air commercial. Want to get away? It's like that. And believe me, I've had those moments. But there are ways to build up your arsenal of go-to lines and preparing in advance for those awkward moments. But the number one thing, do your best to respect your audience is a good starting point. If you're not clear on something, do not throw the Hail Mary and hope they find it funny.
Yeah.
I tend to play a lot more conservatively with something I'm not 100% sure of.
Sure. Well, and that's one other thing I think it's interesting of, you watch, let's say, the hour-long HBO stand-up special that has been on that network forever. And I mean, I've saw, this is going back maybe 25 years ago, there was a Jerry Seinfeld film, I think just called Comedian.
Yes.
That showed him going back out on the road. And, the little bit I've seen of documentaries or shows about this, of like the craft and the work and like the hour stand-up show may seem like, wow, the stand-up's just this comedian's just brilliant. It's an overnight success, but there's all the hours and time spent in clubs testing different jokes and bombing and putting that aside, or bombing and making it better. And that hour-long stand-up is kind of the culmination of a lot of work, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, it could take a year to craft a new, even a half hour of material for a serious comedian. And I remember hearing something about that. And it's been forever since I've seen it. Jerry Seinfeld will spend an entire day crafting a line, taking it from an 8-word line to a 6-word line to make it funnier. He'll spend all day on one line to do that. And it is a craft, and it's an art form. And I did stand up for 7 years, which led to some of the success I've had as a speaker, because I was able to transition the clean material and style into speaking to become memorable, and storytelling as well. But stand-up comedy is tough.
Yeah.
Really tough.
there's jokes, and then I think there's some comedians where, like, as a speaker, I try to be a better storyteller, and I think of, like, for example, like John Mulaney. He's not telling jokes; he's a storyteller. If you're familiar with his work, and the just boy, the you can tell it's not just talent, but it's craft. It's the combination. He's putting in the work.
Yeah,
Clearly.
and it is storytelling. And people some still say, "Oh, Steve, you used to be a comedian. Tell me a joke." I don't tell jokes. I didn't tell jokes when I was a comedian. I was a storyteller, and it was all crafted with a comeback and a callback from the beginning, perfectly timed, and the physicality and the facial and the voice and everything has to work together. Now, the comedians that just do rapid fire, joke after joke, God love them. That's just not something I'm
Yeah.
even interested in doing.
Yeah, that's like
I'm a long form storyteller.
That's like a Stephen Wright, or more
Yeah.
more common, or more modern days Dimitri Martin, or somebody where it is in a way it's jokes, or yeah. One other question about, if we're trying to use humor as a speaker or in some sort of setting, I think you've touched on this a little bit. What happens when you bomb? Like, you think something is going to elicit laughter, and then you do get that deafening silence, and what I think gets referred to as flop sweat
Yes.
forms on your brow.
Oh,
I think you alluded to sort
very
of
real.
planning for that. How do you get out of that very real situation?
Here's how I've always looked at it. I've got a couple of go-to things in my back pocket at all times. If I'm speaking and I have the clicker with me for a slide presentation, because I use a lot of visuals. I don't put words on the screen. I use a lot of visuals. If something lands flat, I'll generally look at the clicker, hit it on my hand a couple of times and say, "Oh my gosh, I muted the audience." And then I just start banging my thumb on it, like waving it around. They start laughing and I go, "Oh, thank God I hit the right button. Good to have you back." And then if God forbid, there's another moment, I'll just stare at them and say, "I'm so sorry. That was way funnier in my head before it fell out."
Just
And they'll laugh
acknowledge
at
it.
that.
Yeah.
And people say, "Well, what happens if it happens a third time?" I said, "If it happens a third time, I'm not a very good speaker, and I better go work on my craft, because I don't have a third get out of jail free, card." Oh, that would actually be a good third one. I should get a Monopoly card that says get out of jail free. But if a third time, that means somehow you have not made a good connection with that audience. They don't love and trust you yet. They haven't warmed up to you yet. They haven't connected yet. And if it happens a third time, maybe you're not the best fit for this audience. And there is such a thing as not being a good fit. You mentioned your engineering mind.
Yeah.
Early in my career, I got blinded by a really nice paycheck to speak in front of a dozen aeronautical engineers without a handout, opening with humor, getting in their space, and bombed horrifically. I described it one time. Somebody said, "Steve, it couldn't have been that bad." I said, "Picture an old World War II movie." Because now that you shoot a plane, it just blows up. Back then, you just put a few bullet holes in the fuselage. It drains a little oil, little flame, little smoke, and it trails smoke until the plane crashes. I got shot 5 minutes into a 90-minute speech
And
and trailed smoke the rest of the way.
Oh, no.
Oh, it was bad.
Well, an audience
Really
of
bad.
12, it sounds like, would be a challenge, because there's not as much of that. Like, I think watching a movie at home on the couch that's funny, it's yourself or you and your spouse or whatever, it's one thing. But there's something to be said for being in a comedy club or a theater where there's other laughter and it's contagious, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, right out of the gate, I had an written introduction that led to my opening line of the speech. And the person in charge, the head engineer, looked at it, crumbled it, threw it over his shoulder. He goes, "Well, everybody, I Googled this guy. He seems okay. Hey, Steve, come on in." And I'm in the hallway going, no, that did not just happen.
Yeah.
So it was an awkward start, as it was. And again, this is very early in my career. I got it out of the way early. But it was a brutal setback for about 3 weeks. I canceled everything I had, and I just crawled into my basement recording studio and sulked for about 3 weeks. And then, somebody called up and sent me a testimonial for another speech that had happened that went really well. And I got right back on the horse and went back out. And now that bad one, it's just a punchline about knowing your audience, being connected and being relevant to people and understanding styles. Very important, because now I will say no to an event like that because I'm doing them a disservice by me saying I can communicate with them because it's not my audience. We don't speak the same language.
Yeah.
God love them. If it wasn't for engineers, if I was in charge of technology, we'd still be living in caves running from our food. So I'm just not their audience. And it became a lesson. And yeah, it was a mistake. So
And
there's
it
another
sounds
one.
like there's a lesson around emphasizing it's very important that you read this. Did that become part of your game plan?
Very,
Yeah.
very. I started to ask a lot more questions and to educate myself more to make sure that I was the right fit for whomever I might be working with, and to not be afraid to say no and say, here's the reason why I'm not a good fit.
Yeah.
You and I may have a great conversation, but your audience, from what you're telling me, is more of this style, brain, intellect,
Right.
level of education and industry that I just can't speak to that, but I can connect you with somebody who can. So at least I'll still provide a value for that person.
So I'm not going to get into the details from a time standpoint, and I'm just not going to. But maybe someday. I turned down a speaking gig, which these days, to be honest, they have not been exactly rolling in the way they were before the pandemic. It didn't seem like a fit on a couple of different levels. And a friend of mine who I talked to, and a bit of an advisor, and we do similar work, and he was kind of reinforcing, is like, if it's not a fit, you got to say it's not a fit. I wasn't going to do it just for the sake of having a story someday to tell on the podcast. It was a mistake to accept that. It was a mistake to accept that gig. That won't be a future episode, but yeah, sometimes it's just Spidey sense says, you know what, this is not a fit. Maybe another speaker, or maybe no speaker at all, would be better for your meeting. So, so
yeah, and those happen. And you know what? They're going to appreciate you more for your honesty in the way that you are setting them up more for success than something that you're just not going to feel right. From the moment you step on stage and grab that microphone, it's going to be in the back of your head, I shouldn't be here.
Yeah. And so, I think, if anything, I made clear to them, it's not about the paycheck at all costs. I'm thinking about what I think your needs are, and at least maybe they'll, I think they'll respect that. So
and there's an integrity in that, which is really a very important thing for what you and I do.
Sure. So if I had a vision board, I think there would be something on there about integrity and integrity, values. So. So on that note, before we wrap up, and again, our guest has been Steve Gamlin. When we talk about vision boarding, and you have a free masterclass, a vision board learning program, I'll put a link in the show notes, but can you tell us a little bit about that? Who might be interested in that, and why?
Sure. A lot of people have never even heard of vision boards or visualization or how to see what their goals look like. They're used to, okay, here's my 3 resolutions and there we go. So to understand it's a free masterclass. It's about 32 minutes long. And it's me walking people through what visualization is really all about and what it can help you to achieve, and just things and guidelines of what to be thinking about, how to proceed forward to understand it better, so that if you are going to set some goals, that you are not as affected by the winds of change as so many people have been with 2020 and all these things that are going on right now. To be resilient, to be really dug in with your roots, to understand what you want to create. So that's all in there. It was a blast to create it. And most of it came out of conversations I've had with my clients over the years, my vision board clients.
Well, thank you for offering that. And again, link will be in the show notes, or memorable domain name. Here's a good thing: motivationalfirewood.com/vision. I believe that's correct, not a mistake.
Yes.
Okay. Well, Steve, thank you.
So.
Good. Well, thanks so much. Again, you can also go stevegamlin.com to learn more about his work and everything that he's doing now. So, Steve, thank you for telling the story of that career mistake, but more importantly, what you learned from it, and kind of getting out from that pit into making a positive out of what came out of that situation. So I really appreciate you sharing that with us. Really enjoyed what you had to share with us today.
Thank you so much. It's been a long haul, but every day when I wake up, I look back and I say, yeah, it was a mistake, but so worth it. So thank you.
Well, I'm glad. Thanks again.